Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sneha, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the latest Petit Pro palette from Viseart, which is Chou Chou, I believe the way you pronounce it, but the writing is Chou Chou. I'll put it up on the screen right now. So if you'd like to see my thoughts on this palette, swatches, and also how to create 3 different looks using just these tiny little 8 eyeshadows, then please continue watching. So let's start with the swatches of this palette. So here's the finger swatches on bare skin. So my skin doesn't have anything underneath it. And most of these swatches are just single swipe. So as you can see, it's a good mix of warm and cool tones with light to medium depth. And as I'm swatching this, I'm also going to share any dupes that I've found. Now, just to stay within the quality of Viseart eyeshadows, I've limited myself to finding dupes within my Viseart eyeshadow palette collection. So just keep that in mind. So there's 2 shades in this palette which I think are definitely repeat shades. So in case you don't have those bigger palettes and you do want to try the formula, this can be a good entry palette for you. I do have a similar shade to the first shade in Chou Chou, but it's not exactly the same. It's much lighter and not as yellow as the shade from this palette. This is from the Theory palette Minx, and it's the lightest matte shade. Again, with the swatch, you can see that it's lighter and also has more white in the shade compared to the one from this palette. Next, moving on to the second matte shade from this palette. Now there's no exact dupe for the shade, but the closest ones would be the middle one, which is from the Warm Mattes palette, and the last one, which is from the Dark Mattes palette. But again, these have more of a yellow and an orange undertone compared to the shade from the Chou Chou palette. Moving on to the next matte shade, which is this bright pink from the palette. There's no dupes that I found for this, but the closest in color would be the pink from the Editorial Brights palette. But again, you can see that the Editorial Brights shade is a lot more warmer and richer compared to the one in the Chou Chou palette. Now moving on to the last matte from the palette, which is my favorite shade. It's this beautiful peach color from the Chou Chou palette. And again, there's no exact dupes for this shade, and I really hope Viseart comes out with a full-size pan of the shade. It's absolutely brilliant. The one right next to it is from the Petit Pro 2 palette, but as you can see, the tone is a lot more red and a lot more deeper. One next to it is from the Theory Siren palette, and again, it's a lot lighter in tone. And then the last one, just as a comparison, I just kept it just to show how orange the Editorial Brights orange is. Now moving on to the metallics, the first one is the silver shade, and it's an exact dupe for the one from the Viseart Grande Pro 2 palette. So it's the same texture, same finish, same everything. I cannot tell any difference. So if you've been thinking about the formula from the Grande Pro 2, and if you wear a lot of silver tones, this might be a great option for you. The next shimmer is this nice peachy gold color. And the closest dupes for this is the middle shade, which is from Minx 3, and the last shade, which is a different texture, but it's from Grande Pro Volume 2, and it has glitter particles through it. But you can see that the undertone of the base shade is quite similar to the one here in the Chou Chou palette. Moving on to the next metallic shade, which is this duochrome, and this is almost an exact dupe to the one found in the Koi palette. In fact, I actually prefer the formula in this one. It's more creamy to touch compared to the one in the Koi palette, which is slightly drier to touch, but both of them apply beautifully on the eyelids. So it's a duochrome shifting from a light, very pale green to a light peach color. And for this last metallic shade, which is this pink color, I really didn't find any dupes. The one right next to it is from the Grande Pro Volume 2 palette. And as you can see from the pan, it looks slightly more purple and is more cool tone compared to the one in Chou Chou. Whereas I would say it's more similar in tone to the other 2 shades, which is from the Boheme Dreams palette. And I feel like the tone in the third shade is quite close to the one from the Chou Chou palette. Just that the Boheme Dream palette shade is a lot more smoother and it's not as shimmery, if that makes sense. Now let's move on to the 3 looks I've created, including this one that I have right here. Now for all 3 looks, I've already primed my eyelids with the NARS Eye Primer. Look number 1 is a very warm toned look, and I've used 5 of the 8 shades to create this look. So first starting with the lightest matte shade from the palette, I'm using the Wayne Gauss brush number 16 for this and applying that as my brow bone highlight. Next using like a skin tone matte shade and applying that as my transition shade. Next moving on to the matte peach shade from the palette, and I'm using it on the My Kitco 1.14 brush. And I'm going to apply the shade to the outer V of the eye and also along my crease. And then I'm running the shade also along my bottom lash line. And then going back to the first brush and just blending away the edges. Next using the shimmery peachy gold shade on a My Kitco 3.3 brush, so any flat brush will do for this, and applying that dry onto the eyelid. And then just to lighten up that shade, I'm going in with this duochrome shimmery shade from the palette, which has almost a light green to a peachy shift. So just layering that on top of the previous shade we'd used. Then using the small brush from London Brush Company called Classic 18, going to run the same shade as my inner corner highlight. Then using a brown pencil for my top waterline, and then this beautiful orange pencil by Linda Hallberg for my bottom waterline. And then finishing off the look with mascara for my top and bottom lashes. And on my lips, I have the Buxom lip gloss in the shade Sweet Thing. And that completes look number 1. Look number 2 is slightly more cool tone, using more of the pinker tones from this palette, pink and silver. And that's using 6 of the eyeshadows from this palette. First, I'm using the My Kitco Pro 1.15 brush and using the lighter shade from the palette as my brow bone highlight. Using the same brush, I'm going to the shade right next to it to act as a transition shade. Next, I'm using the My Kitco Pro 1.2 brush with the peachy shade from the palette. I'm going to apply this to the crease of my eye and also to the outer corner of the eye. And then going back to the previous brush just to blend out the edges of this eyeshadow with the transition shade. Next, I'm taking a smaller My Kitco crease brush. This is 1.14 and I'm going in with the matte pink shade from the palette. And I'm applying this to the crease of my eye over the peachy shade. But because we have that peach as a base, it's going to look slightly warmer. And also taking the shade on the outer V of my eye and also along my lower lash line. I'm then running a little bit of that peachy shade we had used just on the outer corner of the lower lash line so that it connects it along the edges of the eye, if that makes sense. Once we have that, I'm going back in with the first blending brush we'd used and taking some of that skin tone shade from the palette and applying it along the edges just to blend everything out in the crease. Next, I'm taking a small flat brush. This is the brush 3.3 by My Kitco. And I'm also using the Esom Pro Mixing Medium. And I'm going into the shimmery pink shade from the palette. And I'm applying this all over my mobile eyelid, all the way from the inner corner to the outside, meeting the matte pink shade on the outer V. I'm also running the same shade along the bottom lash line, just in that inner corner space. Next, I'm using this tiny brush by London Brush Company, Classic 18, to use that silver shade for the tear duct area. And then for my waterlines, I'm taking a black gold pencil. This is by Linda Hallberg for my top waterline, and the blue pencil for my bottom waterline. And finishing off this look with mascara to my top and bottom eyelashes. For my lips, I had 2 options. This first look, I have the Colourpop lip pencil in the shade Wild Nothing. And then I topped it off with a Buxom gloss, and the shade is Nicole. So that's this look right here. But it looked a little brown in the picture, so I wasn't sure when filming, so I also went in with the second lip option. This is a lipstick by Madame Glam, I believe. And they'd sent me this lipstick a long time ago. But it's a shade Sophisticated Wine, so any hot pink kind of a shade will work for it. And that created a pop of color on the lips, so it's a more fun look, I feel like. But obviously you can do a nude lip with this, a pinky nude lip, so there's lots of options. But here's two of them. Lastly, I have the look that I'm wearing right now, which is using all the eyeshadows from a palette. That almost never happens, so I'm really happy that I was able to use every single shade from this palette. And for this third look, I'm again starting with the lighter shade from the palette and applying that under my brow bone as a matte highlight. And I've applied that using the My Kit Co Pro 1.15 brush. Then I'm going into the second shade from the palette, which is more closer to my skin tone, and applying that bright underneath the first shade we used. So it's acting more as a transition shade. Next, I'm going into my favorite shade from this palette. It's this beautiful, almost neon orange peach shade. And I'm applying that to the crease of my eye using My Kit Co 1.14 brush. Next, I'm going back to the fluffy brush we used and into the second shade we'd used, the mustardy yellow shade, just blending it along the edges of this peach shade. Then going back to the orange shade, and I'm applying that to the outer corner of my eye and just connecting it towards the outer V, if that makes sense, just connecting it to make that shape. Then I'm going into the matte pink from the palette and applying that along the lower lash line, more so in the center of the lower lash line, and then also the outer corner of the top lash line. And whatever's remaining on my brush, I'm also running it along the lower portion of the crease. And then right next to this outer V, I'm going in with the shimmery pink from the palette. And I'm using this with the mixing medium by Isam. And I'm going to take that on the My Kit Co 3.3 brush. Any small flat brush will work for this. So just packing that on to that portion of the eye. Next to the center of my eyelid, I'm going to take this beautiful peachy gold shade. And again, with that Isam mixing medium and the same My Kit Co brush, applying it right to the center of the eye, and then blending it towards the previous shade we had, the shimmery pink one. And then lastly, with the same brush, but using it dry, I'm going into the duochrome shimmery shade, which has that green to peach shift. And I'm going to apply that to the inner corner of the eye. I'm also going to run that shade just along the lower lash line inner corner as well. And then lastly, for the silver from the palette, I'm applying it to the very inner corner of the eye, so just near the tear duct area. And then for my waterline, I've used a nude eyeliner. This is by NARS. And then to tightline my top lash line, I'm going in with the Wayne Goss brush number 8 and the Viseart black eyeshadow from the Neutral Mattes palette, and just stamping it along the top lash line. And then finishing off the look with mascara on my top and bottom lashes. Now to go with this look, I did want to kind of mirror the peachy pink tones that are going on the eyes with my lips as well. So I first went in with the Pat McGrath Mini Matte Bronze Lipstick in the shade Fever Dream, which is like a deep peach shade, which has slowly become one of my favorites. And on the inside rim, I've just gone in with the Sephora lipstick in the shade Mr. Lover. It's like a hot pink shade, so it just adds that beautiful stain to the inner rim of the lips. And that's it, that's look number 3. Now the palette retails for £26 here in the UK and $30 in the US. Now as with the packaging, you do get it like a typical Petit Pro packaging. So it's like a folding palette, I guess, very tiny. You can see it literally fits into the palm of my hand. And then as you open, you do get a small tiny mirror, which I almost never use because I usually have a bigger mirror. And I do prefer a larger mirror when I'm doing my makeup. But this is what the 8 shadows look like. If you see the hard pan in the shimmer shades, it's not from the formula or from Viseart. It's just because I've used a mixing medium to create some of my looks, and that's the reason. That's the corner I'd use from those shades, the orange one and the pink one. So that's the reason they have the hard pan. Another thing I love about this palette is the beautiful coloring of the palette. Because earlier when I had the Petit Pro 1 and 2, they looked the same from the outside. So they were all like a dark brown or black, I forget. I think a dark brown color, but you couldn't tell if it was volume 1 or volume 2. So I appreciate when the packaging is a slightly different color. It's just easier to pick out from the drawer. As far as formula is concerned, I have no complaints really. All the matte shades applied and blended out beautifully, as you've seen from the 3 looks that you've seen me create. And as far as the shimmers are concerned, this one is a really nice creamy shimmer, whereas this one is more of that transparent kind of shade, but at the same time looks beautiful when paired over either a peach shade or a green shade, depending on what kind of shift you would like from the shade. It's a beautiful duochrome. I especially love the shimmer shade. It's a beautiful gold, but it's like a peachy deep gold, which makes it absolutely stunning. I think this will be fabulous, especially on deeper skin tones. And then lastly, we have the shimmer pink shade, which is slightly more crusty. It's not as firmly pressed, I feel like. So I do prefer using that with a mixing medium just because I want to avoid fallout. But all of them apply and blend beautifully on the eyelids. Overall, I would recommend trying out this palette, especially if you don't have some of these shades in your collection. My favorite shade, hands down, is that beautiful matte peachy shade. This one right here. So if Viseart is ever watching this video, if they can bring out a full pan of the shade, if they can bring out a full pan of the shade, that would be fantastic. I don't know how to describe it, but it has some neonness to it, which makes it special. It's a beautiful orange shade. But that's it for this video. I really hope this was helpful to you guys. If you enjoyed it, definitely consider subscribing to my channel and also give this video a thumbs up. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!